All right, let's get started while people are still trickling in. So welcome, everyone. For this session today, we are going to say that you are all data engineers. How many of you are data engineers as of now? Okay, most of you, good. For those of you who are not, you are now a data engineer. And you're starting a new project, and that's when the question comes up, which tool do you use? Do you want to use good old Azure Data Factory? Do you want to use Azure Synapse Analytics? Or do you want to go with the new cool kid in town, Microsoft Fabric? And the answer to that, for those of you who are consultants, you know the answer. It is?
It depends.
Perfect. Yes, of course, it depends. But what does it depend on? That is what we are looking at here in this session today. So we are going to look at the 3 different services, and I will try to save a little bit of time at the end for any questions. It is only a 20-minute session, but I'm happy to continue conversations outside after. All right, so welcome to Choosing Between Fabric, Synapse, and ADF. My name is Cathrine Wilhelmsen, or Cathrine Wilhelmsen. I work as a lead consultant / solutions architect / tech lead. I do all the things in a Norwegian consultancy called Evidi. On my free time, I love doing blogging, speaking, organizing events. I organize Fabric February in Norway as well. Because of that, I've been a Microsoft Data Platform MVP since 2015. You can find me on Twitter or Blue Sky at Cathrine W, and I blog on cathrinew.net. Let's get into it. So we'll start in chronological order here. Let's start with Azure Data Factory. Azure Data Factory is a standalone service, and you use it for data integration, for workflow orchestration, and for scheduling. And inside of Azure Data Factory, you can do 2 main things. The first one is to ingest data from a source to a destination or a sink, and you can also transform that data. In addition to that, you also have the orchestration and scheduling capabilities. That is pretty much what Azure Data Factory does, and it is really, really good at it. If we look at Azure Data Factory, like I said, it is a standalone service. So it fits well into your architectures, even if you are using components outside of the Microsoft space. So when you're using this, you can connect it to things like your data lake storage or blob storage. You can connect it to your data warehouse. It can also be things like Snowflake if you use that. You can connect it to various databases and even things like Databricks. But all of these are connections that live outside of the world of Azure Data Factory. Now, if we were to combine all of these and look at this as one more kind of unified offering, that is the idea behind Synapse. When Azure Synapse Analytics was launched, it was launched as a unified analytics platform. And it covered a lot of different things that previously were separate services. So you had to go and spin them up, and you had to connect it all together and do all of that manually. Synapse did part of that job for you. So behind the scenes, it made sure that you could do the data integration parts that we knew from Azure Data Factory with ingesting and transforming data. But it also tied in a lot more components. So you had the data lake built in. You couldn't create an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace without creating a data lake as well. You also had the data warehousing part, which is what most people thought of when Synapse was launched. It came from the Azure SQL Data Warehouse world. You also had big data analytics. So for the first time, we kind of had that integrated Spark environment where we could run our notebooks and run our code. We also had time series analytics. So Data Explorer, Kusto was also built into Synapse. And finally, data science. It was there, maybe not the biggest component, but it was there. And inside of Azure Synapse Analytics, you had the 3 different engines. So the first one was the SQL pools, or dedicated and serverless, 2 flavors of that. You also had the Spark engine, and finally, the Data Explorer engine. And this was, the really first iteration of Microsoft's vision of having this unified platform. Now, you can pick and choose which components to use. And this is kind of important when we look at Azure Synapse Analytics because you don't have to use the expensive components if you don't want to. And that is something that a lot of people may not realize or maybe even forget at times. It's more than just the expensive components. So you can use it for very small, cost-effective solutions. I've done that many times. But you can also use it for enterprise scale and expensive solutions, depending on your use case and scenario. So the expensive part, let's take that one first. That is the dedicated SQL part. It's the data warehousing component. But it is a very tailored tool for large data warehouses. And we are talking probably, I would say, closer to petabyte scale. In that case, this is a really good offering still. It gives you complete control of how you want to distribute and partition your data, indexing, workload management, and all the things that you will need for that kind of data warehouse. And this is still a pretty good feature to use Synapse Analytics for. Again, it costs a little bit of money. So you have to be aware that you are paying for the kind of that cloud scale, large scale data warehouse components. But you also have something that I am still a huge fan of, and that is serverless SQL. Serverless SQL is a way for you to query the files that you have in your data lake storage by using SQL. So if we are coming from the SQL world, but we do want to kind of start adapting that to that data lake, kind of data lake house mindset, serverless SQL can be really, really good. And it is very cheap if you use it the right way. I currently have solutions running purely on serverless SQL on top of a data lake, and it costs, I know I had one project that cost less than $1, a euro, a pound, a month. It was very, very cheap because my customer they didn't have big data, they had small data. So they had data sets where we could do all of the data lake file storage and just kind of virtualize that data warehouse on top and then bring that into Power BI. And that was all that they needed. So we didn't have to pay for expensive solutions since we didn't actually have to. So Synapse was Microsoft's first vision, and some of you who may have heard, there were some rumors about Synapse Gen 3. We were all waiting for it, patiently waiting for news. It got dead quiet for, I know, a year, at least a year from Microsoft. And that's when we got into the next components. We went from this unified analytics solution, and then suddenly Fabric was launched last year. And that is kind of the new cool kid in town. But what is Microsoft Fabric? And how is it different from Azure Synapse Analytics? Because there is a lot of overlap here in terms of functionality. So it is very different in one very important way. You got all the new shiny icons. This is super important. They're all modern. They're all the 3D effect, new colors. It just makes it a whole lot easier to kind of sell a new product, right? Instead of a new generation of something that had a few issues. I don't work for Microsoft, so I can say these things. But they also had the one major difference, and that is the Power BI kind of scenario, because this is where Fabric is coming from. It is kind of the same concept as Azure Synapse Analytics, but it has been built up on a completely different architecture. So same functionality, but it comes from a very different perspective. So in our case here, we can recognize the same things from Azure Synapse Analytics. You have Data Factory for data integration, built-in functionality for data engineering, data warehousing, data science, real-time analytics. We just heard this in Synapse, right? But the difference here is that Fabric is a software as a service. So a lot of these things have been kind of hidden for you. You don't have to twist and turn the knobs, and it's made from I would say, more of a business user perspective, or at least from a Power BI user perspective. So instead of building on that, kind of coming from the IT world of data factory, data engineering into Synapse, we looked at what made Power BI great. And Power BI had the usability. It has a user friendliness, very easy to get started, and that is kind of where you come into Fabric as well. So if any of you were working in Power BI and then suddenly everything turned green and you got that F logo everywhere, that was just because Fabric is the new Power BI. Power BI is one of the experiences inside of Fabric, so it is a superset of Power BI. The important thing here is the underlying architecture. Everything in Fabric is built on top of one lake, which is a tenant-wide or organization-wide data lake, or underneath the hood, it might be multiple different data lakes, but you think of it as one logical lake for your entire organization. And all of your data is stored in open file formats in here. Even your data warehousing data is stored as Parquet files in OneLake. And you can use the OneLake File Explorer to go and dig into those files from your computer if you want to. You can move them into other systems if you want to. So very different mindset, as well as the built-in security, governance, and compliance, of course. So Fabric, again, takes all of these components, but it is a software as a service. It's completely packaged into one. So what do we need to think about when we choose between these? First of all, the kind of architecture that you're working with. If you're only working with like a data lake architecture, or do you work with more of a data warehousing side of things? If you're working with just a data lake, Azure Data Factory as a standalone component for ingesting data could be exactly what you need. Data warehouse, you might want to look into Synapse for those very large scale projects, or Fabric could be the way to go. Data lakehouse, I would say Fabric is probably the only one who really supports this. Synapse has kind of that virtualized lakehouse mindset, but not as polished as you get inside of Microsoft Fabric. And if you're looking at data mesh, where you have multiple teams of business users and IT pros working on their own data products, then absolutely Microsoft Fabric. It has been built for that with the concepts of workspaces and workspace security, data domains, and really enabling smaller teams to do their own kind of engineering work, even though they might not be data engineers. You also have to think of the users. So IT professionals, some of them might look at Microsoft Fabric and go, well, I can't tune all the things. I want to look into this, or I want to deep dive and change things. And they might also complain that Microsoft Fabric is not entirely, enterprise ready. There are some features there still on the roadmap that we are waiting for. But if you need something that is fully deployable through CI/CD or from PowerShell, or if you do something like that, Fabric might not be the tool for you. Again, Fabric is coming from that business perspective. Power users, they can probably use all of it, but they might prefer using Microsoft Fabric. And obviously, you would never let your business users into your data factory, right? You would not let them go in and build your own pipelines. They can play with that in Fabric in their own workspaces, but definitely not in that enterprise infrastructure that you are deploying your Azure data factories to. And then you have to think about how many solutions do you want. If you want a single solution, Microsoft Fabric is perfect for that, because you do have some of that CI/CD, deployment pipelines, and so on, but the real power is enabling all of your business users and all of your power users and your teams to work on projects together. If you want distributed solutions, again, with the automated deployments and so on, you can't really do that in Fabric, so you might want to look at Data Factory, for example. And again, if you're working with client projects, then you kind of have to adapt to what your client wants. Some want to work on only tools and features that are mature, that have been stable for a while, that have been proven to be efficient. And in that case, maybe they are not ready to try Microsoft Fabric because there are still features on the roadmap, and cutting edge / bleeding edge technology tends to hurt a little bit. So you just have to kind of look at what is the type of solution that you are working on. Pricing, also very important here. Two main differences. Azure Data Factory has that pay-as-you-go model. Have any of you tried to estimate an Azure Data Factory project upfront? Was it easy? You could give it's like, I don't know, between 1,000 and 1,000,000, somewhere around there. It completely depends on how much data you load, how you load it, the pattern that you're implementing. Some of the features are very expensive, such as the mapping data flows functionality. Data movement can be expensive, depending on whether it's in cloud, on-premises, inside of VNet, and so on. There are so many components that you need to take into consideration that it is nearly impossible to give an estimate upfront. Same thing kind of goes with Azure Synapse Analytics. Some features are fairly expensive, so you might just go, I'm not touching that at all. I had some coworkers who were like, if you have money to burn, you turn on that button. Otherwise, just never ever touch that one. But there are still, like I mentioned, serverless SQL pools can be very, very cheap, but still difficult to estimate upfront. And that, I think, is one of the benefits of Microsoft Fabric. You can kind of look at it as more of the on-premises box that you had in the past, where you bought a server, it was sitting there, you could use it as much as you wanted within the limits of that server. Microsoft Fabric is kind of like that. So you do have two different price models there. You can choose to go for the pay-as-you-go, where you pay per second, you can scale, pause, and resume, but you still have fairly, I would say, easy to know upfront how much it's going to cost you, and you always have that max, the max pricing based on the capacity that you choose, and then, of course, how much you are running that within the month. But you also have the reserved pricing, and this is where I see a lot of people are choosing Fabric purely because they know what it's going to cost them from month to month. So you can have reserved pricing, you figure out using the pay-as-you-go which kind of capacity you need, and then you reserve that capacity for a year at the time, monthly commitment. So you can scale it up and down, you just have to wait until the next month. And that, I think, is the benefit. You know what it's going to cost, plus the Power BI licenses that you need on the side anyway. You know how much it's going to cost, and you just have to use it within the limits that you have. So let's compare. And some of the questions that I get that I'm guessing some of you have, Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse Analytics, are they dead? No, they are not. They will continue to live. They have separate roadmaps. I would assume that there will be very little new functionality. I think most recently, the newest things that have been built into Data Factory and Synapse is the option to work with your Fabric lakehouses and warehouses and write directly into your OneLake. So I would not bet on new, like, revolutionary things coming to Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse Analytics, but if you have invested in these, they are not going away anytime soon, especially not Azure Data Factory, because it serves a very specific purpose in those large architectures where you can have many data factories in your architecture. The other one, should I always use Microsoft Fabric going forward? Again, no. It does have that minimum cost of the lowest tier that you need to pay per month, and there are projects where that might be too expensive still. I would say a lot of the Microsoft marketing is always focusing on this, like, petabyte scale and super, super fancy Fortune 500 companies. Many projects are not that at all. So you have to see, maybe even at the lowest tier, which is fairly cheap, it might still be way more than you actually need. Like my client who paid, $1 a day. So I know we have about 1 minute left, and I think, can we just check, are there any questions online? No. All right. Any quick questions in the room before we wrap up? I will continue conversations later as well. It is a very short session. Do we have anything right now? Yes. So the question was, can you move from ADF and Synapse into Microsoft Fabric? Yes, so whether you should go with Fabric in the future because there are not coming more features. I would say yes. All the innovation is coming to Fabric. If you are starting brand new projects, then that is probably the way to go. But again, look at the pricing in terms of the project that you have. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. Any other questions? I'll be happy to stick around. This slide is mostly for your reference if you want to compare and share that with your coworkers. Other than that, I hope you find the right tool for you. Have a lovely rest of SQL Bits, and thank you for attending.